Chapter 9 Finding Jonathan Stuart. When Johnny awoke, the silence was startling. He expected to hear the breathing of the others and perhaps even Norman's snore. Upon opening his eyes, the east-facing window lit the room more brightly than Johnny was accustomed to, and he had to blink several times before he could see clearly. He remembered where he was as soon as he saw his surroundings. Johnny wanted to jump up and get ready as quick as he could, but he looked at the clock and saw the sun woke him a half hour before his alarm, set at 6:30. He only had himself to get ready and down to breakfast by 7. The room that shared a bathroom with his was vacant, so he did not even have to fight someone for the bathroom either. A new experience for Johnny. Johnny was still tired, but found it difficult to get back to sleep in the light. Every time he started to doze, he awoke with a start, thinking he needed to wake Elizabeth or make sure the boys were getting dressed or monitor turns at the bathroom, etc. When he saw it was only 10 minutes more until his alarm, he started getting himself ready and taking his time for a change. It seemed odd to go through the whole morning routine without speaking. Johnny found the need to speak even though there was nobody to hear, just for his own peace of mind. He mumbled things like, "Time to get in that shower," "The water is good and hot today," or "Where did the toothpaste get put last night?" Finally, Johnny went down to breakfast. It was a relief to sit around a table bustling with the tenants and the couple who owned the house. Johnny didn't say much the first few days, but only listened to the general conversation. He noted it was mainly about the weather, how various sports teams were doing, and some light discussion of events in the daily newspapers making their way around the table. Johnny arrived at the hardware store after a brisk 15-minute walk and immediately got to work. He found the work at the hardware store similar to what he'd done for years. Later on, he was to spend more and more time assisting customers. That would be new for him. At dinner, the conversations were more casual, and often people asked questions and tried to get to know one another. A few friendships even seemed to have developed, but mainly between suitemates, who had more occasions to talk. After a day that was more silent than Johnny thought possible, he longed to join in with the dinner conversation, but had no idea what he should say. Only one person spoke to Johnny the first night. "Hi, I'm Steve. You're the first new guy we've had in quite a spell. Tell us who you are and where you are from." He managed to stammer, "I'm Johnny Stuart, from Townsend." A few of the onlookers gave a quizzical expression, so he added, "A little place, not far off. East, I think." A woman, Sheila, spoke up. "Look, Steve, you nearly scared the kid. Give him a bit of space up front. In a few days, I reckon he'll fit right in." To this, everyone gave a friendly chuckle and left Johnny alone. Johnny wished she'd kept her peace. On the third morning, Johnny joined in with the boisterous social banter at breakfast. "Looks like rain this morning. Has anyone seen the weather report in the paper?" Sheila nudged Steve with her elbow and said, "Told you he'd come around when he was good and ready." The topics were so vague it hardly took the place of a personal conversation with friends. Still, it helped him start getting out of the shell he'd been in since his arrival. At dinner that night it was a little more difficult, but he was now comfortable enough answering their questions, to which there were many. One man asked, "What do your parents do over in Townsend, Johnny?" There was a moment of stunned silence when he responded, "I'm from the Townsend orphanage." The man didn't know what to say, but eventually managed, "Sorry to hear that. I hope I didn't stir up any bad memories in asking." "Not at all. I was very young when it happened. I don't have many memories at all before the orphanage." Sheila added, "And I thought you'd be overwhelmed with so many of us at the table. If I'd known, I wouldn't have said to lay off you the other night. You're going to do just fine with this group here." One morning, Johnny overheard some breakfast banter that grabbed his attention. As one of the tenants was flipping through the paper, Steve asked, "Joe, have you got the section with the foreclosures in it?" "Yeah, Steve, I'm looking at them now. It looks like most of them are from Townsend again. Any idea where that is?" "It's not far off. A short drive. It's a nice little burg, but a guy has to wonder why so many people are defaulting on their bank loans over there. I've been looking for the bank to start selling them at a loss to get rid of them, but the notices from Townsend are only in 1 week, and the next week they're already gone. Somebody's sure been snatching them up right quick." "Sure does seem odd. Say, didn't our new guy say he's from Townsend?" "Hey, yeah, say, Tommy. No, Johnny, wasn't it?" To which Johnny gave a nod. "You know anything about all that?" Johnny thought it over for a moment and responded, I didn't know anything about people losing homes to the bank, but I knew the police chief always had stacks of eviction and code violations to be passed out. A woman across the table added, "My friends rented over there for a while. People were offering them cheap rent, but they got out." The husband said there was no pleasing the mayor, who always had some new codes, and silly stuff too, colors of curtains and nonsense like that. The wife said she constantly heard the landlord complaining about the situation. It all seemed a bit unfair. To this everyone grumbled some comment like, "I sure do wonder what's up with all that." And the table talk turned to the weather forecast. After 2 weeks, Johnny's neighboring room was still vacant, so he spent his idle time exploring his new city and looking for more work to help him with the part-time hardware job. It was difficult locating something within walking distance. The lack of a car also meant waiting on the bus for his mentoring sessions with the pastor, something they decided to scale back to once a month. Johnny longed for the freedom of a car, but it would have to wait. One morning, after about 3 weeks in the boarding house, Johnny awoke to the faint smell of smoke. It was so faint that it didn't immediately alarm him. Probably someone burning a brush pile, he thought. Then he realized it wasn't coming in the open window, but from the direction of the doorway. He quickly slipped on his clothes from the day before and went to investigate. The boarding house had a central kitchen, dining room, and living room area all on one floor, with the family's living space above it. The tenants lived in separate 2-story buildings that only attached to the original home by narrow first-floor hallways. The men's wing ran across the back of the property and the women's wing went along the front. The yard in between looked more like a public park with benches and tables for visiting. The smell was very faint in the men's wing and grew slightly stronger in the common area. Johnny's first thought was to check the family's private upstairs area. As he began to climb the stairs, the odor grew fainter. Knowing that smoke rises, he decided it couldn't be coming from the upstairs. There were strict rules against having mixed company in the residences, so Johnny was quite nervous to check the women's wing. Upon entering the door, he forgot his caution. Now the smell of smoke was unmistakably from a fire. Johnny thought, "The house is burning." Looking up the stairs, he saw a thick blanket of smoke begin to hug the upstairs ceiling. By this time, a woman came to her door just beside the stairway, also investigating the smell of smoke. She was a bit startled to open her door and immediately run into Johnny, but quickly realized he was only there because of the smoke. "What's going on, Mr. Stuart?" she asked. "I don't know, but the smoke seems to be coming from upstairs." He motioned to the stairway. "While I go up and take a look, you'd better wake the people up on this floor and get them out. After this haul, get the owners to call the firefighters." She saw the smoke herself and exclaimed, "Good idea, but be careful." She quickly turned and knocked on the door across the hall. As Johnny went up the stairs, he could clearly see the smoke coming from under a doorway about halfway down the hallway and billowing up to the ceiling. Johnny knocked loudly on the first couple of doors in passing as he went straight to the door in question. A woman came to the second door just tying her robe. At the sight of the smoke, she exclaimed, "Fire! I need to get my clothes." Johnny shouted down the hall, "No time for that. Start getting everyone else up and outside." The woman immediately began banging on all the other doors. The door didn't feel warm to the touch, as Johnny expected, so he gave a loud knock on the door with his fist. With the volume of the smoke, Johnny didn't wait for a response. He immediately put his shoulder hard into the door with a loud crack of wood. A second hit splintered the door frame around the latch and sent it flying open. Johnny was surprised at the volume of smoke that came billowing out. Looking in the room, he saw what appeared to be an ironing board completely engulfed in flame. The flame was beginning to trickle up the wallpaper beside it. Johnny suddenly thought to scan the hall for an extinguisher, but in the flurry of all the women running to the stairs, he couldn't see any. When Johnny looked back in the room, he noticed feet sticking out of the bathroom. The fire was on the other side of the room, so Johnny didn't hesitate to grab the fallen occupant. After getting her into the hallway, she began to come around as though from a faint. Johnny asked, "Ma'am, can you walk?" She replied, I think so. Help me for a moment, though." She started hobbling along the hall to the stairway with one arm on Johnny's shoulder. Halfway down the stairs, she finally was stable enough on her own. Going out the nearest entrance, they discovered the first fire truck crew unfurling hoses. Fortunately, the nearest station was only 6 blocks away. The yard was too close to the home, so the occupants watched from the empty lot across the street. Firefighters rushed in and out of the emergency exit of the women's wing for about 15 minutes before all the action died down. The room and its two neighboring rooms suffered heavy fire and smoke damage, and water damage ruined the three rooms immediately below. Smoke saturated the walls, floors, and ceiling of the upstairs, and the floor needed completely redone. Fortunately, due to the home's construction, the rest of the house just needed a good cleaning and airing out. However, some people still swore they could smell smoke in parts of the home for many years. Johnny's time at the hardware store went very slowly that day because he wanted to be home finding out what was going to happen. All this took time to sort out, and Johnny didn't find out about the new arrangements until returning in the evening. After rushing home, Johnny found himself helping move Joe into his room and Steve into the neighboring room along with another of the male tenants. The women took over the lower floor during the repairs of their own wing. While creating some problems, the fire actually helped Johnny with two different struggles he'd been having. Johnny finally had a suite mate, and besides that, a roommate as well. Some people chose to move, but most residents found themselves living two to a room. Johnny was relieved to have some companionship. Going from a room with a half-dozen people to a room of one was too much too soon for Johnny. He chuckled to think about how much he'd looked forward to the solitude while he was still back at the orphanage. After the other men settled in, Johnny suggested, "While we're in the habit of moving stuff, why don't we see if all of the women have gotten settled? Maybe we can help them move their stuff." Steve replied, "I had today off. A few of us took care of it earlier. No doubt they got the worst of it and had to wash all their clothes for the smoke. I dare say some of the stuff the ladies had upstairs will always smell of smoke." Joe added, "If they light up something with an iron, now that they're downstairs, it'll wipe us all out." He intended it as a joke, but nobody so much as smiled. Awkwardly, he added, "What are the odds of that? We're probably safe enough." "Oh, I nearly forgot," Steve exclaimed. "The owners wondered if you were still looking for work. The company they lined up to work on the building is short-handed. If I had any time to spare, I might throw my hat in the ring. I hear construction pays fairly well." This was the second thing the fire did for Johnny. He finally found more work. There was one more thing the fire did for Johnny that he didn't like. It brought back many bad memories and all the emotions that came with them. This wasn't the first fire Johnny had to deal with. Everyone praised him for his bravery and for saving Sheila, but he knew that it wasn't courage. It happened so fast it never occurred to him to be scared. On top of that, Johnny knew he was never in any real danger. Not this time. Several days later, Johnny came late to breakfast. The conversation seemed quiet, like people were talking in whispers, but it ceased the minute Johnny entered. He thought this rather odd, and then everyone was nearly silent for the rest of the breakfast. Johnny hadn't been sleeping well since the fire, so he was too tired to give it another thought and continued about the day. He now worked 2.5 days at the hardware store and 2.5 with the construction crew. He figured this would eventually wear him out enough to sleep well again. The next morning, Friday, Johnny awoke to someone shaking him. It was Joe saying, "Hey Johnny, wake up. Time to get up." Johnny sat up and looked at the alarm clock. "Sorry, I overslept," he exclaimed as he began to scramble to get up. Since both of them needed to get going at the same time, Johnny had agreed to get up early and finish first so they wouldn't be in each other's way. "No, buddy, relax," Joe reassured him. "I noticed you've not been sleeping too soundly at night. I got up early today and shut your alarm off. I figured you needed the extra minutes more than I did. We have some time. I wanted to talk to you about it." "What do you mean?" Johnny asked. "Have I been bothering your sleep too?" No, I'm not upset, just a bit concerned is all. You seem to be having a bout of bad dreams. I hope you don't mind me asking a personal question, but did your parents happen to die in a fire?" "I guess I don't really know why, but it seemed to me that you were dreaming about the fire, but you said some things that didn't really match." "I don't seem to remember having any dreams lately. My dad died in an accident before I was born, and my mother was sick for some time, but I already told you that. I don't remember them much. Why? What did I say?" "Just some name. It was hard to make out. I think it was something like Eliza Bell, or... I'm really not too sure about the second part." Johnny took this as a bit of a shock. He was thinking about many things while he was awake, but he'd never been one to have bad dreams over his concerns. He merely responded by saying, "I don't want to be late. I need to start getting ready." It was obvious he was uncomfortable talking about it, so Joe concluded with, "Look, I think this whole fire situation has stirred something up. If you don't want to talk to me about it, that's fine. but you ought to talk it over with someone. As for me, I'll be the one to get up early from now on, and don't say a word otherwise. I'm your elder by at least a good 5 years." Johnny had never been so glad to see a Friday in his life. Fortunately, he already had plans to catch an early bus on Saturday to Townsend for a session with Pastor Stevens. After Friday night's dinner, he told Joe, "I'm just going to lay down for a few minutes to rest." Within moments, Johnny was asleep and knew nothing else until his alarm sounded early Saturday morning. Johnny was up and out the door for the bus stop before the first light, though he found a cold front had come in and he needed to go back to grab his jacket. The sky grew lighter during the bus ride, and Johnny saw that it was going to be a cloudy, dreary day. When he'd gotten on, the driver suggested he would need an umbrella, and now he could see the man was right. The rain began just as the bus was nearing Townsend. It wasn't a downpour nor a sprinkle, but the soft and steady kind of rain that generally lasts the whole day. He sighed as he accepted the fact that he'd be soaked through by the time he reached the pastor's door, but as the bus approached its stop, he saw Pastor Stevens' car in the parking lot. As he hopped in the car, Johnny said, "Pastor, are you ever a sight for sore eyes? And not just because of the rain. It sure seems like a very long month has passed." As they drove along, Johnny filled the pastor in on life at the boarding house, his job, and of course the details of the fire earlier that week. He didn't mention anything about his reaction to the fire or his conversation with Joe on Friday morning. He wanted to wait until they were busy with whatever tasks the pastor had lined up. That always seemed to help Johnny express himself. The day's task ended up being sorting books and straightening up in the church's meager library. The pastor sighed after he explained the task and added, "In any other church, the library would be maintained by a retired teacher or someone with a couple hours to spare during the week. It's just one more thing that falls squarely on my shoulders. You must feel absolutely blessed to be free of the orphanage responsibilities." "That's one way to look at it, I suppose," Johnny responded. "But it sure is lonely, and I don't quite know what to do with myself when I'm not working. I think about the children and Eliza Beth a lot. Ever since the fire, I keep thinking about Eliza Beth, or perhaps I should say worrying. I hear I've been dreaming about it most of the night, and I'm always so tired. Johnny, I do believe you've not told me everything you've been going through. It never occurred to me to ask what your personal reaction has been to the fire. It sure seems to me that would stir some things up if nothing else would. I guess you had better fill me in on things." Johnny proceeded to tell him about the conversation that he had with Joe and asked the pastor, "You know, I had no idea about those dreams, so what do you think?" "I do believe that fire has brought back some old memories, some unpleasant things, but I also think there's more to it than that. I'm betting that you were already feeling guilty about having left little Eliza behind." The pastor continued, "Then I bet there are hours on end that Elizabeth never even crosses your mind, and you probably go on to feel guilty about that. Most people go through this sort of thing during life's transitions. On top of that, you've always placed some unreasonably high expectations on yourself, my boy, and especially about Eliza Beth. You saved her, and that's part of it, but I've always felt there was something else. Did anything else happen all those years ago you've neglected to tell me about?" After a moment's silence, Johnny gave a deep sigh and began, "I never told you, but I talked to her father, or rather he talked to me, just before I took off with baby Eliza. The last words he ever spoke to anyone. Do you know what he said to me?" The pastor merely shrugged, and Johnny continued, "He told me to take care of her, Pastor. Take care of her. Well, some great job I'm doing with that now. She's no longer a part of my life." A shocked look passed across Pastor Stevens' face. He sounded quite astonished when he said, "Well, of all the important details to leave out, why didn't you ever mention this before? What a heavy weight for a young man to carry, and for all these years. I have to believe the man never intended that you, a mere boy, should take all that responsibility on your shoulders alone, or to devote your entire life to it. You were only about 12 years old, if I remember correctly. At that age, it would have been so easy to read all that into it. You really should have told this to somebody. Pastor, it seemed somehow like something that was meant to only be between me and him. I've always felt like I was making some sort of solemn secret promise in taking the baby. I see what you're saying, and know it's true, but my heart just doesn't feel it like that." "Of course it doesn't, Johnny. But often our biggest deceiver is our own heart. Eliza is a big part of your life, Johnny. Sure, your heart aches to be away from her for so long. That's only natural for those we care about. Johnny interjected. You ought to say that she was a big part of my life. It's all over now. She's out of my life. And that's another thing, Johnny, Pastor Stevens continued. Where did you ever get that idea from? Even if you never see her again, which would be your mistake, she is and always will be a part of your life. Do you suppose that you can't go and visit? Even if you can't, there's always the mail. It never once occurred to me to ask Miss Johnson about visiting with Eliza. I just assumed it would do more harm than good for me and for her. I don't see how I can be a regular part of her life anymore. I did mail her a gift, but never thought about a letter either. It's going to be difficult at first, and it's probably best not to start visiting right away, lest she expect things to continue as they had. I hear you didn't say goodbye, and I bet that's another thing you're feeling guilty about. She's quite beside herself these days. Johnny, you really should write a letter, and soon. The conversation became so intense that both men forgot the task of the books. The pastor took that as a good sign. He'd noticed this seemed to be the trend whenever he made good progress with Johnny. The pastor had other business he needed to bring up, but thought it best to lay off for a moment or two. They worked on in silence for a little while, with an occasional comment like, "Pass the tape. Can you make out the title on this card?" and other items of library business. Johnny, the pastor cleared his hands and folded them on the table. Eliza isn't the only one you're apart from these days. A look of terror entered Johnny's eyes. He wildly exclaimed, "Mary Beth! I was supposed to try to call her early in the week. The fire and all the stress it put on me pushed it right out of my mind. Whatever will I say to her? She's going to be so mad at me." "Easy, Johnny," the pastor reassured him. "Actually, I forgot to tell you that the fire was mentioned in the paper, and she's quite at ease about you missing the call. When she last met with my wife, she said that you'd remember when things got back to normal. The bad thing is that means I have to deliver a piece of news that she would have preferred to do in person." The pastor then paused for a moment and looked out the library window. Johnny said, "I'm not going to like it, am I? You're stalling. That usually means you don't think I'm going to take it well. Out with it now. Just spit it out already."